The Baltimore Ravens pick up their 22nd straight preseason win with a 24-17 win over the Arizona Cardinals. We dive into a recap of that game and more next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, and we're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day here. We're free and available on all platforms. That includes on YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline, as you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts, and we're back on a Victory Monday. And I think the new question is, will the Ravens ever lose in the preseason again? And it's a valid one at this point. It feels like 22 straight preseason wins for the Ravens. Again, their last loss, as I've said many times before, back in 2015. It was a 24-17 win for the Ravens here over the Arizona Cardinals, a game that the Ravens were in control of early on, and the Cardinals crept back into it. Actually pretty close by the end of it, but Baltimore pulls out the win. We're going to discuss everything related to the game here today. Also, a couple more notes. The Ravens signing Demarcus Robinson, the wide receiver, or expected to sign Demarcus Robinson. I don't think it's been made official yet by the team, but that was news that dropped on Friday. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the Fox broadcast, which was something. It was something. So we'll talk about that as well. But in the first segment, we'll talk about the offense in that Arizona game. The second segment, defense. And the final segment, Demarcus Robinson, the broadcast, and any other miscellaneous stuff we have to cover. So jam-packed show today, another Victory Monday show at that, as I said. But let's dive into it here. Before we do that, though, be sure if you're here with us in audio form, so Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. First of all, thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts, and also be sure to turn notifications on as well. And I thank you so much again. And also, if you're here with us in YouTube, that's video form, be sure to subscribe to this channel, like the video as well. That helps out a ton, and we're growing really, really quickly here. It's the same show, both audio and video, so you're not missing out on anything in either format. We're a Daily Ravens podcast. That means we got you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, covered with Baltimore Ravens content. That's analysis, updates, historical perspectives, anything you need to know. We have you covered right here. So let's dive into this content here now. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter at CashRocket34 and the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens. All right, now let's actually do it. Let's dive into the content. The Ravens, again, 24-17. Baltimore got really good performances on the offensive side of the ball from many players. I want to start off with the quarterbacks, and obviously Lamar Jackson was not one of those players, as he did not play in this game. But you had Tyler Huntley and Anthony Brown both performing very, very well. Now, for Tyler Huntley, he played in the first half and ended up completing 13 of 14 passes for 129 yards and a score. Huntley has only thrown 3 incompletions this entire preseason throughout 2 games so far. He's looked sharp. He's looked accurate. Looks like he has more zip on his footballs as well, which I've noticed. He looks to be every part of the player that I think people wanted to see. Now, we have seen a little bit of issues with deep ball accuracy still, but I think, again, the positives for Tyler Huntley, there have been so many, and that really is the only thing I can say. Well, maybe there still has to be an improvement there, but look, no player is a perfect player. I've been very, very impressed with Tyler Huntley, and I think that, again, he is the perfect player to be backing up Lamar Jackson. Now, again, there has been, and this game was definitely fuel for this, the trade speculation for Tyler Huntley. Should Baltimore part with Tyler Huntley? Is a team willing to offer the Ravens a first or a second round pick for Tyler Huntley? If I'm the Ravens, and let's say Seattle, for example, is offering me a first or a second round pick for Tyler Huntley, I think I've seen, decent enough things from Anthony Brown, or I'd seriously consider that deal, especially for a player like Tyler Huntley, who I think does deserve the opportunity to start at the NFL level. I don't think that is going to come in Baltimore. I think Huntley certainly has the stuff to be a successful starter at this level. So again, that's a deeper conversation for another day, and it's one we'll definitely get into throughout the rest of the offseason here as the preseason winds down. But it is a conversation that now Tyler Huntley is beginning to get a little bit more national media attention, and it's something to monitor for sure. Now, again, I think that Baltimore values him to the point right now where they would not trade him unless a Godfather offer comes across the table. But you know what? There's been stuff that surprised me before, and so maybe something would surprise me here. So the guy who would replace Tyler Huntley, but for right now is a third-string quarterback and is doing a pretty good job in that role, is Anthony Brown, the undrafted rookie out of Oregon. 10 of 13 passes, 91 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. The interception coming later in the game, right when it felt like, just run the clock down. Brown throws the interception. But I think overall, again, I didn't know what to expect from Anthony Brown coming into the preseason. I felt like he had a lot of areas he could improve upon, and he's looked sharp. The ball that he threw to Riley Webb for that, 38-yard touchdown was a beautiful ball. And sneak preview of the broadcast said Jordan Stout scored that touchdown because obviously Riley Webb and Jordan Stout were in the same number right now. But still, regardless, that throw from Anthony Brown was perfection. It was perfection for me. And so he's shown enough where I think that obviously, this is still my opinion, Baltimore probably won't keep 3 wide receivers on the or 3 quarterbacks, on the roster. I think that it's going to be 2. Those are Lamar Jackson and Tyler Huntley. And then you try to sneak Anthony Brown on the practice squad. Now, has he done enough for another team to maybe say, hey, we want that guy as our third quarterback and we'll put him on our roster? Potentially. But I think for both guys, I've been very impressed by what I've seen out of them so far. Let's move on to the running backs, though. You have Tyler Beatty getting an extended look, 12 carries for 34 yards, only comes out to a 2.8 yards per carry average, but I think Beatty played better than that. I think this was a much better performance than we saw in the first game against Tennessee, looked more confident as a runner. I think the offensive line also did him some favors. Not that they didn't do him a ton in the first game, honestly. He was getting open running lanes, showed some shiftiness, and showed his ability as a guy who can really do a lot of different things. He didn't catch a pass, or he did. He caught 2 passes for 5 yards in this one too. So the averages aren't going to pop off the screen. Beatty scored a touchdown catching the football as well. But I think he looked better. He looked more confident, which I was very encouraged by. Other running backs, Mike Davis got the start in this one, 6 for 18, 3 yards per carry. Nate McCurry had 1 for 9, but ended up leaving the game. He took a really big hit and left the game after 1 carry. Tyler Huntley, 2 for 9, and then you had Justice Hill, 5 for 5. So a little fall from grace there for Justice Hill after the first preseason performance he had. I still thought he looked shifty, but obviously 5 for 5 is not an amazing stat line, but there's more that goes into it, and I still think Justice Hill looks a lot better than he did last offseason. So the running game really wasn't what the Ravens needed, and honestly, the Ravens, in terms of, and we'll look at team stats, time of possession-wise, the time of possession battle was a lot more even in this game as opposed to what it was against Tennessee. Baltimore held the ball for 31 minutes and 55 seconds, Arizona for 28 minutes and 5 seconds. So the Ravens still won the time of possession battle, but Baltimore, I don't know, it just felt like their offense didn't get a ton of opportunities in this game, despite holding the ball for so long. Arizona ended up getting more first downs than Baltimore, 20-17. But Baltimore ended up averaging 5.4 yards per play. That did include just 2.9 yards per carry, but they averaged 7.8 yards per pass. So that was also decent enough to get the job done, which was great. So the running game was not the focal point. It was definitely more the pass game with Tyler Huntley and Anthony Brown. And pass catcher wise, what can I say about Isaiah Likely? I mean, what can I say about him? He's winning the MVP. It's settled. I don't make the rules. I'm sorry. It's happening. It's happening. It's incredible what he's done so far. He's done so many great things so far in training camp, and we've heard about those, right? The one-on-one battles with Kyle Hamilton, and he has translated that over to the preseason. In this game, 8 catches on 8 targets, caught every target he had for 100 yards and a touchdown, all before the first half ended. He again showed the ability to go up. He caught contested passes. He was able to make some guys miss, running in the open field, shedding blockers or shedding tackles, being able to go out there and also power through guys. He did everything, and he is showing why he is probably going to have a very big role on this offense come week 1. And he deserves it. Him and Mark Andrews combined, it's going to be a problem for opposing defenses, especially when you factor in what will hopefully be a healthy J.K. Dobbins, and hopefully we'll see a healthy Gus Edwards, and hopefully we'll see there's other guys come back too. Plus, you have the threat of Lamar Jackson with his arm and with his legs. Ever shot Bateman. I mean, it all over the place. This offense has weapons. Isaiah Likely quickly turning into one of those weapons, I'm so impressed with him so far. And honestly, he's a guy that I think you should be buying in fantasy football. I moved off of another rookie tight end to get Isaiah Likely in my dynasty league we're doing. So that was something I'm very proud of, and I was a very proud Isaiah Likely dynasty guy in this game. But still, Isaiah Likely shown that he has a big role in this offense. Other receivers in this game, not a ton of action. Riley Webb, 2 for 46 in a score. Mekhi Polk, 1 for 19. Bailey Gaither, 2 for 18. Justice Hill, 1 for 8. Shamar Bridges, 1 for 8. Nate McCrary, 1 for 7. Tyler Beatty, 2 for 5. Mike Davis, 1 for 5. Josh Oliver, 1 for 3. Pesher Ricard, 1 for 1. And Nick Boyle had 2 catches for 0 yards. So, yeah, overall, good day for Isaiah Likely. Other pass catchers didn't necessarily have a huge stat day, but that's okay because the Ravens, they got the job done. They also showed, Riley Webb showing some flashes. I think that he is a candidate to definitely make this the practice squad. The Demarcus Robinson signing, we'll talk about this, maybe complicates the rookie wide receiver or undrafted rookie wide receiver situation, assuming he does make the 53. So we'll talk about that in the final segment. But the offensive line, I'll quickly talk about the offensive line. We saw, again, a lot of guys shuffling around, a lot of versatility. We saw Jawan James out there again. A guy whose stock is down for me right now, though, is Tyree Phillips. Had 3 penalties. And look, I dock people for penalties. John Harbaugh is not happy with penalties, right? So I take penalties into account. And Tyree Phillips, I don't think helped his case on Sunday night to win a potential offensive line spot on the starting line and that left guard position because he committed 3 penalties. Now, some of those did come at tackle, wasn't all at guard, but I don't know. I just think anytime a player does that, it definitely means a stock down for me. So I'm putting him in the stock down category. I still have confidence in Tyree Phillips, but the left guard competition is still very, very wide open. So yeah, we'll be able to kind of get a gauge on that as maybe the third preseason game comes. But yeah, the offensive line, I think they did a decent overall job. Some things to clean up, but some guys, I think Daniel Fele got some good run again. So that was good to see. Tristan Colon getting some time in there, Patrick McCary getting early time. So yeah, it was I'd say overall fine performance by the offensive line, some good, some bad, etc. But we'll head into our first break here on Locked On Ravens. We still have a ton to talk about here in the show, so don't go anywhere. We're going to be diving into the defensive side of the ball in Baltimore's 24-17 win over the Arizona Cardinals. So be sure to stay tuned. We still have a ton to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. But first, I do want to tell you a bit about BetOnline. And BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to check out on all your betting needs. You can find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. You can find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, from live game betting scores and podcasts. They have you covered. So over to BetOnline today. Use mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts. We're back here. Our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher is still hanging out with you here. And again, thank you so much for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow along with us in audio form. And also, it's Fantasy Draft Week on the Locked On Podcast Network. However you play, experts from Locked On Fantasy Football and Locked On Dynasty Football bring you daily positional top 10 lists to get you ready for the season. Find Locked On Fantasy Football and Locked On Dynasty Football on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. And reminder, based off fantasy football, I do Locked On Ravens fantasy leagues every year. Those are going to be coming up soon. I'm going to be putting out the tweet relatively soon here. So if you want to get that information from our Locked On Fantasy Football experts, go ahead and get that and get ready for the league coming out soon. But let's dive into the defensive performance for this Ravens preseason win. Again, 22 straight Jimmy Smith number, or Pepe Williams, and we'll talk about Pepe Williams in a few minutes. But let's start off on the front seven, the defensive line. Travis Jones. Travis Jones. He's a player that is, again, I expect to have a huge role in this defense, and again, dominated in this game against Arizona, which is constantly winning, constantly shedding blockers, getting to the quarterback, blasted Trace McSorley, just ran through him, and it ended up being roughing the passer penalty. So again, not ideal, but he has power. He has the ability to just finesse guys. He's a multi-skill set player that can stop the run, rush the passer, generate interior pressure, sack the quarterback, just be a disruptor, an overall disruptor. We use that word a lot with Odafe Owe, and I know that word is pretty universally put on Odafe Owe as someone who is a disruptor. And Owe himself was fun to watch, by the way. He almost had a sack, just barely missed off Trace McSorley before that interception by Kyle Fuller. So again, we'll talk about the secondary in a couple minutes. But Travis Jones ends up going down with an injury and was a pretty big scare, I'm not going to lie. Ends up, walking off the field, going to the medical tent, doesn't return to the game. You have John Harbaugh after the game, luckily, saying that it was a hyperextension situation. So not a very big deal compared to what it could have been, maybe an ACL tear or something of that nature. So obviously you never want to see a guy go down, never want to see an injury like this, but I think this was one of the, if not the best case scenarios for the Ravens. And Jones, I mean, look, he hasn't played an NFL regular season game yet, but he has shown his worth so far throughout training camp and throughout the preseason through 2 games. I mean, he's somebody, again, who maybe the Ravens, they favor veterans throughout the first month of the year, but then by the time we're talking in December or January, Travis Jones has a massive role on this team and is a key part in maybe keeping some of the snap counts down of veterans like Calais Campbell or Michael Pierce or Brent Urban, depending on where he lines up. So I'm very excited for the future with Travis Jones, but John Harbaugh did say that Jones will not be playing in the preseason. And obviously, yeah, it's smart. And also, I think just the recovery from the injury is going to take away from that as well. On the defensive side of the ball, though, I mean, we can look at what Arizona did from a team perspective. They had 306 total yards, averaging 4.8 yards per play, though. They ran 64 plays compared to Baltimore's 54. Now, Arizona was 8 for 15 on third down, so the third down efficiency was a bit over 50%, not completely ideal for the Ravens, but not like 75%. So it wasn't a horrendous showing there, but wasn't an amazing showing. I'd say Baltimore, on the other hand, went 3 of 8. Arizona ends up also passing for 251 yards, rushing for an extra 55. I mean, look, Baltimore held Arizona to 2.6 yards on the ground per carry, which is very impressive. They averaged 5.8 yards per pass, while Baltimore averaged 7.8. So I think the defense ended up doing a pretty good job overall. I talked about Travis Jones, another defensive lineman, and I want to get this name out there. I've been kind of hinting at it for a couple weeks now. Isaiah Mack. Isaiah Mack is someone who had the 2-sack game against Joe Burrow, had multiple pressures against Joe Burrow in that week 15 game. Was it week 15? I kind of like block out the entire 2021 season, but in that late season game against Cincinnati, he pressured Joe Burrow and got to him a couple times. And in this game, he had a couple pressures as well and really did a very nice job. He's someone like the Ravens have, I think there's 6 guys on the defensive line: Calais Campbell, Michael Pierce, Brent Urban, Travis Jones, Justin Madubuike, Broderick Washington. They also have guys like Aaron Crawford and Isaiah Mack and Rashad Nichols who could all theoretically make this team if maybe their depth wasn't as deep. Now, maybe Baltimore can stash Isaiah Mack on the practice squad, maybe stash Aaron Crawford on the practice squad. I don't really see their ability to, because those 2 players, I think, are 53-man roster worthy somewhere. But Isaiah Mack had a great game in this game against Arizona, so I was very impressed with him overall. Brandon Stephens led the team in tackles. I think his stock was a little down in this game. Now, I'm not saying it was completely just plummeting, but he did have a couple penalties. I thought his coverage was decent overall, but the couple penalties, you have the unnecessary roughness on the first play of the game. That's something John Harbaugh just despises, I'm sure, and those types of penalties, stuff that John Harbaugh despises. Then he had the pass interference call on a big throw to Andy Isabella, where he did kind of like grab the shoulder, like side of him a little bit, almost seemed like he was trying to prop himself up. So look, those penalties are stuff that have to get cleaned up. I mean, again, I do dock people for penalties. Some people are different in that, and I understand that. So that's why my stock for Brandon Stephens is a little bit down. He also did do a decent job overall in coverage, so I'm not doing like a complete Brandon Stephens terrible. No, he had a decent game, but the penalties, I just those are stuff that has to get cleaned up. But I think that the good part about this for Brandon Stephens is that you can get him cleaned up now and not in September, October, November, etc., when those will mean a lot more, and John Harbaugh will get a lot more angry at those types of things. Malik Harrison and Josh Ross both had 5 tackles. Those are 2 guys I wanted to highlight here. I thought both had really, really good games, and I've been talking about Zakoby McClain a lot, who I actually think is a stock down in this game. But Josh Ross is quickly becoming my favorite out of all the undrafted defensive players to make this roster. And part of the reason, I mean, he's flying around out there, making impact plays. In Baltimore, I mean, Kristen Welch is someone who hasn't really stood out a ton to me. And I think that there is, if the Ravens do keep 4 inside linebackers, I think that Baltimore could potentially make Josh Ross that guy. Now, Ross was at Michigan with Mike Macdonald. They both kind of came over. Josh Ross is an undrafted guy. Macdonald is that defensive coordinator, obviously. There is a connection there, and Ross is playing really good football. Malik Harrison, on the other hand, a second strong preseason showing, in my opinion, was, again, flying around the field, making plays. So he's somebody who wants playing time, and he's earning some playing time, in my opinion, right now. Chuck Wiley had 1.5 sacks in this game. Really, really nice back-to-back plays from him. He was a player that was literally on the outs. I mean, Baltimore was reported they were cutting him. Then Trent Harris got injured. Baltimore ends up deciding not to cut him. And he might have, played himself. The Baltimore has to get their roster down to 80. He might have played himself into another week of ball for the Ravens. You have Kobe McLean. I talked about him a little bit, stock down. Kyle Hamilton had an up and down game. I mean, look, he's a player that's still learning. I'm not going to dock him too much here. Did have a really nice deflection on a play that was probably going to be a touchdown when the Cardinals were driving and inside the 20. So good for Hamilton for getting his hands on that football. But again, yeah, he's a player that I'm not overly concerned about. The natural talent is there. You also have guys like Tony Jefferson, who I know missed a tackle. We talked about Christian Moss. Dalen Hayes, I haven't really seen a ton from Dalen Hayes, honestly. I really, really, really want to see more because I think he's super talented, but we just haven't seen it so far during the training camp portion and the preseason, so that's not what I want to see. Darrell Worley didn't have an amazing game overall. And then it was just some of the veterans as well in there. You had Brent Urban, Stephen Means, Kyle Fuller got some run as well, he had an interception. Pepe Williams had an interception too, and he's somebody who plays the game the right way. He's somebody who I really enjoy watching and just brings so much joy on and off the field too, which is super fun to watch also. So Baltimore's defense, I think, has a lot of playmakers on it. And I think it's not just the stars, right? We have talked about the depth. We have talked about how this preseason streak is not just about the starters and the stars. If they didn't have the depth, if they didn't have the quality depth, they wouldn't be in the position they are, and they wouldn't have won 22 straight preseason games right now. When it comes down to cut down day, when you got to cut down that roster to 53, they're going to have some tough decisions to make on that roster. I mean, even Armour-Davis Washington gave up a touchdown, but then bounced back with 2 really nice plays. So it's those types of players that are kind of on the roster bubble that you have to figure out if you're Baltimore, are they doing enough to get a 53-man roster spot? So we'll get more insight on that as the preseason goes on, as we get into the final preseason game against the Washington Commanders coming up on Saturday. And then after that, guys will have proven or not proven their worth to be on the roster to earn playing time, and that will be the end of that. But yeah, so Baltimore picking up that 24-17 week 2 preseason win over Arizona, their 22nd consecutive win of the preseason. But we're going to head into our final break here on the show. Coming up, we're going to be diving in to the Demarcus Robinson expected signing, the Fox broadcast comments, and more. So be sure to stay tuned. We still have a ton to talk about here on the show. But first, I do have a very important message. And you're hanging out with some friends and putting back a few drinks. A few becomes a few too many as the evening comes to an end and people start to head out. You think you're calling for a ride, but now you live nearby. You can make it home okay. It's no big deal. What are the odds you'll get pulled over anyway? And even so, what's the worst that could happen? Your insurance goes up. You lose your license. You lose your job. You total your car. You kill someone. Everyone knows about the risks of driving drunk. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, that still doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel while under the influence. That's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, think again. Play it safe and plan ahead to get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's forever. Drive sober or get pulled over. We're back here. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this glorious Victory Monday as we talk about the Ravens 24-17 win over the Arizona Cardinals in week 2 of the preseason. Thank you so much for making Locked On Ravens your first listen to Be sure to subscribe on YouTube if you haven't already. I appreciate that. Follow along in audio form if you haven't already. I appreciate that as well. But Baltimore loves those Friday news dumps, I'm telling you. And Baltimore ends up, well, the news gets out that the Ravens are expected to sign wide receiver Demarcus Robinson. Now, I've been saying pretty much all offseason, veteran wide receiver, veteran wide receiver, veteran wide receiver. And they actually get a guy that I talked about. If you're listening over the past couple of weeks, I mentioned the fact that Demarcus Robinson was let go by the Las Vegas Raiders. And I said, you know what? Maybe Demarcus Robinson is their guy. And guess what? Demarcus Robinson is their guy. Now, a bit of background on Demarcus Robinson. He was a 4th-round pick in Kansas City a couple years ago. Was played 5 years in the NFL, dating back to 2016, where he was drafted. Played those 5 years in Kansas City. Totals for him so far throughout his career: 145 receptions, 1,679 yards, 14 touchdowns. A guy who really likes going up there and getting the football, catching the football in contested situations. And I've talked about, and a lot of people have also, about how the Ravens need that physical profile on their roster. We talked about Shamar Bridges, right? A 6'4" guy who can go up there and get the football and bring it down, strong hands, and plays big. Demarcus Robinson, he stands at 6'1". He plays like he's 6'4", 6'5". He jumps out of the gym, is able to do so many good things. And he's somebody who actually has had a ton of success against Baltimore. Like, he's been one of those, like, Raven tortures who's just gone out there, almost like AJ Green. Now, not to that extent, obviously, but Demarcus Robinson has had his fair share of moments against the Ravens. So I'm pretty sure they're glad to have him on their side now once this thing is announced. And Demarcus Robinson wasted no time showing support for Baltimore, showing support for the Ravens on social media. He talked about how he was excited to get to Jimmy Seafood. He posted an Instagram story of himself in Ravens gear, changed his entire Twitter layout to Ravens stuff already and Baltimore stuff. So he's bought in, it feels like. And look, there's been a lot of pushback on this move by people, considering, maybe the guys who were out there like a Will Fuller or a T.Y. Hilton, Odell Beckham Jr., etc. There could be a potential trade target that people are looking for. Darius Slayton, maybe Jalen Reagor is that guy. I don't know who it is. Scotty Miller, Tyler Johnson, etc. Demarcus Robinson is somebody who, again, is not a needle mover. But again, after Julio Jones signed with the Buccaneers, I didn't really see a needle mover who could help this team for 2022 unless something drastic happened. And the injury history for Demarcus Robinson and Baltimore they've had a theme of bringing in guys with durability in the 2022 offseason. And Demarcus Robinson does not stray from that. He has played in every single game in his NFL career. Every game. He's not missed one. You've seen that with Marcus Williams, who I believe has only missed 5 games in his 5-year career. Morgan Moses, who outside of his rookie season has played in every single game and started all but one of those games. So you have a lot of players who are able to stay on the football field. When Baltimore signed Sammy Watkins last year, I talked about this. What was the first thing people said? Again, it was he's going to miss some games. And what did he do? He missed some games. You have the ability with Demarcus Robinson also to say that he's not going to be your number one wide receiver. You don't ask Demarcus Robinson to come in here and catch 100 passes for 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns. He can be your number 4 or number 5 player, depending on what happens with Tylan Wallace. And look, the reality of the situation right now is that Baltimore is dealing with injury at the position. James Prochet is dealing with an injury. Tylan Wallace dealing with an injury. You've already seen Rashad Bateman and Devin Duvernay miss time. He can just be a player who can get the Ravens through the offseason, if nothing else, if he doesn't even make the roster. And I haven't seen the contract specs or anything, but if the contract is a veteran minimum or something, or just above veteran minimum, they can let him go probably pretty easily, all things considered. So this is a move that, again, is not going to hinder Baltimore from making other moves. I think that's another thing people might be hung up on, is they think that this is the only thing, regardless of how it turns out. If it doesn't work, then the Ravens can go out there and do something else that they really want to, assuming this is not like a 7-year, $500 million contract, which I don't think it is. But I think that for Robinson, he's a fine addition. I don't think it necessarily moves the needle at all, but I don't think a lot of moves would have at this point in the offseason, unless you're really going out there swinging for the fences and trading for somebody and giving up, whether it is significant draft capital or significant assets in terms of just money. So I think for Baltimore, it was a fine move overall. We'll see how it works. I mean, it hasn't even been announced yet, so we'll see how it all plays out. But I'm fine with the move. I know some people are a little unhappy with it, and I understand where those people are coming from. I respect that, but I think that at the same time, Baltimore did a fine thing here, and I'm excited. I personally am excited to see how it all pans out. And I think Demarcus Robinson could surprise some people. I can't remember who said it on Twitter, and I apologize that I can't remember. But someone said it's like the Seth Roberts signing almost, who was not this flashy name, spent some good years in Oakland with the then Oakland Raiders, and actually was a solid-ish contributor. Like, again, wasn't a 100-catch guy, wasn't a 10,000-yard receiver guy, but he still was able to go out there and make some plays for Lamar Jackson. Maybe that's what Demarcus Robinson brings to the table here. So food for thought there on Demarcus Robinson. There's my initial thoughts. We'll talk about that the rest of the week. Let's talk about the Fox broadcast, though, for this Ravens-Cardinals game and some of the narratives that were kind of spread across here, because, man, there were it was a whole event. Like, the Fox broadcast was an event. You had people talking about how Lamar Jackson not stay healthy, how the Ravens are trying to stash Isaiah Likely on the practice squad, how there's Tyler Huntley's play could end any potential holdout situation for Lamar. It was all over the place. And look, these national analysts, they have 32 teams to cover, 32 teams to study. But look, these national analysts, they have 32 teams to cover and 32 teams to study, right? It's their job to be able to do that. And I just feel like sometimes things can get lost in the shuffle. And maybe these analysts aren't paying as much attention to a Ravens team as the cool hot thing right now, which maybe is the Bengals or is the Buccaneers with Tom Brady coming back, assuming he will come back this week or whatever it is. Right? The Ravens, they had an 8-9 season. They lost 6 straight games. They had a lot of injuries. That was that. But the narrative that Lamar Jackson cannot stay healthy, he only missed those final games of the 2021 season because of the ankle injury. Those were the first games he had missed due to an actual injury in his NFL career. Now, there have been a couple of instances where he did miss a game with an illness against the Bears. He did have COVID a couple times and missed some time there as well, games, practice, whatnot. But this notion that he can't stay healthy is just it's a false one. It is a straight up false narrative that I think people look at what happened and they see, oh, Lamar Jackson missed the final part of the 2021 season. That means he can't stay healthy, which I'm just thinking, like, really? Like, is that really what we're talking about here? So that was one of the things. The Isaiah Likely thing was kind of crazy. Like that was a little crazy in my opinion. But then also, like, the Tyler Huntley's going to end the holdout situation for Lamar Jackson. It's that stuff as well. Whereas, like, there was no talk from anywhere about Lamar Jackson potentially holding out. It was all stuff that was made up about, is Lamar Jackson going to hold out? Is this going to happen? Is that going to happen? There were no, like, credible rumors of a Lamar Jackson holdout or anything. He's showed up. He's willing to work. I mean, Lamar got interviewed on the Fox broadcast as well, and it was kind of like, how do you tune out the distractions? And he's like, oh, I do this. And, well, what's the challenge of that? And he's like, there's not. So it's all over the Mark Andrews had a funny handshake moment. I mean, really, it was a whole event that we were watching with the Fox broadcast. So again, just more national media narratives. The stuff that the Ravens tune out very well, though, and I give him a lot of credit for it. Lamar Jackson tunes out very well. So yeah, story of the night, though, Baltimore won. Yeah, they won their 22nd straight preseason game. I might have said that once or twice, and it's exciting. We'll talk about this team. Very high aspirations for the 2022 season, and I think they're getting off to a good start here in the 2022 preseason. But that's all I have you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. When we get back here tomorrow, we dive into more Ravens content, continuing to break down this Ravens victory over the Cardinals. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you back here tomorrow.